BJ Watling averages 38 in Test cricket. His strike rate is 42. I mean, it's possible you either ignored most of his career or just didn't really notice it that much. This is where he fits on the leading run scorers of his era. He doesn't really pop out at all. But none of this is surprising. Watling is a slow-scoring middle-order player from New Zealand and a wicketkeeper. He was basically designed in a lab to be invisible. And yet, despite all that being true, he's just had an incredibly surprising career. In fact, he's had an incredibly surprising, remarkable career. Obviously, the things that make Watling quite interesting are rather random and not exactly box office. Because of his incredibly stoic nature, it means his real strength is not how many runs he makes, but how long he is out there. Guys batting at 6 and 7 don't usually do that. He faces more balls than openers do on average. This is an elite amount of balls to take up per innings, no matter kind of where you bat. Watling has the second longest innings ever by a wicketkeeper, and the 8th, and the 11th. He doesn't bat time, no, he bats in perpetuity. He's just brilliant at the ability to match long innings with wicketkeeping, which is just not really a thing. When you compare him to all the keepers since 1980 that we have completed balls for, he's the second most balls per innings. Forget Andy Flower for a moment and look at the other end, Ian Smith. He is a hugely respected New Zealand cricketer, and he's down here. Watling is in another universe. And the amount of balls he faces per innings is not just great for a wicketkeeper or even a middle order player, it's incredible for any batter. In 2019, he was the second best in Tests for balls per innings. But it's also worth just comparing him with other players who bat around the same part of the order as he does. He usually bats at 7 and sometimes at 6. But if you look at the guys from 6 to 8, what you see here is a list of all-rounders and keepers with the odd specialist batter. And here is Watling towering over them all. It's clear he doesn't quite fit in. He's not really a middle order guy. But everything I've told you so far doesn't mean that he's going to stand out from the crowd, even if he's quite different than pretty much every other player here. Here's a bunch of headlines I found for him on Cricinfo. When your own teammates who clearly love you are pumping you up and they call you a reliable sheriff, or when you're talking about your own game and you call yourself limited, you're sort of telling everyone in the world a lot about yourself right there. Perhaps if he'd made more runs and slightly quicker and not been from New Zealand, he would have got more attention. But BJ Watling has done everything he can to face as many test deliveries as possible while being basically invisible. We were talking balls per innings a minute ago, but let's just have a look at him compared to other players' strike rates. These are all the guys with around 3,000 plus runs during his career, and you can see that he's way down here on strike rate. No one who has seen him bat would be surprised by this. But this is all the players, and this includes a lot of top order guys whose job is to come in and blunt the ball. Watling bats at 6 and 7. That's where the gun-happy go-time players are. Stokes, De Kock, Bairstow, Safras, Dick Weller. And Watling does not play like any of them. He's almost 2 runs and over slower than QDK. They are both keepers, but they are basically 2 different species. Watling actually started as an opener in domestic cricket before he was picked for New Zealand. He really spent most of his time at the top of the order, and he only kept in 5 of his first 40 first-class matches. And when he came into the New Zealand side, he was an opener for the first 5, and he didn't keep until his 9th test. And looking at his record, it's like New Zealand hypnotised him to believe that he was still an opener and that he wasn't wicket-keeping. I don't know if we have a position in cricket for a middle-order opening batter, but essentially, that is what BJ Watling was. And now think about who he replaced. Brendan McCullum was the wicketkeeper before him. I don't know if any player has been more important to their team this millennium. McCullum is the opposite of Watling. His innings are short and memorable. He started as a keeper and then decided that he didn't want that job anymore. I mean, that is something to say just to begin with. It's quite a risk to give up the skill that got you into the team. But when they both had the gloves, Watling actually scored more, not even accounting for the fact that his innings were much longer. But McCullum's biggest impact was with captaincy and also when he became a specialist batter after giving up the gloves. Now, he never became a massive run scorer, but he was undroppable in that team and he played some incredible innings. He was a risk taker in every way, including with his own career. And yet even the gambling man can see the beauty in the opening batter who no longer opens the batting. And there's one obvious reason why McCullum would have enjoyed Watling being so good. It's because if they couldn't have found a good keeper, people would have kept saying that McCullum should take the gloves up again. A few months before McCullum said that Watling was his favourite player, Watling had averaged 33 over his first 20 tests. It was lowish, even if he had kept in 12 of them. But clearly McCullum saw something different from him, and over the next 50 tests, Watling would average 40. That's on the low end for a batter, but for a keeper, that's high. It's not even a little high, it's all-time high. And New Zealand has not had an amazing run for wicketkeepers. Like I showed you Ian Smith before, way at the back of the chart. Well, here he is on the New Zealand all-time list of guys who have kept in more than 10 tests. But I just want you to focus on Ken James down here. Because in isolation, just having a quick look, this appears to be one of the worst careers of all time. Like, there are keepers who can't bat. And then there is Ken James, who made 52 runs in 11 tests. But the thing is that Ken James could bat. Not by proper batter standards, but in the days that he played in, an average of 22 in first-class cricket is good for a keeper in the 1930s. And most of those runs weren't in New Zealand domestic cricket. It was for Northamptonshire. He was a Kiwi keeper who played a few tests and impressed people in England so much that he got a county job. He's also known in history as being one of the first wicketkeepers to move back off medium pace bowlers so he could take the edges behind more easily. And in 1 year of county cricket, he scored over 1,000 runs. And there was another season in the Plunket Shield in New Zealand where he was the top scorer. Like, he could bat every single place he played except Test cricket, where he was dismissed 13 times. 5 of them were LBW. Luckily for him, he didn't live long enough to see DRS come in. So it's quite clear that if Ken James is one of the worst wicketkeepers by average, then clearly Watling is one of the best. This is all the keepers in the history of the game with more than 30 tests using the gloves. You can see straight away what an incredible average 40 is. Watling's record with the gloves is on the same level as Matt Pryor and Kumar Sangakkara. It's just the 3 freaks ahead of them, and you can see just behind them MS Dhoni and QDK. Now, we do need to add some context to all this. Wicket-keeping has changed. This is the same list of keepers from the last graph, but filtered by their first year. You can see that keepers started off basically the same as tailenders, and then there was a small group of keeper batters, and now we have a group of batter keepers. But even with that, it's clear that Watling is still an all-time top-tier batter when it comes to the guys with the gloves. And as far as his keeping goes, we don't really have much more than the eye test to go on. I will say that he has the 5th highest dismissal per innings of any keeper ever. But before you get too excited, Cameron Akmal is 6th. And almost all the keepers on this list had seamers who get a lot of edges behind and are in the modern era. CricViz did this earlier in the year using their run saved metric, and you can see him 3rd on the list of current wicketkeepers. For a guy who didn't really keep much before Test cricket, he's clearly done a very good job for New Zealand. But it's his legacy with the bat that he'll remain most remembered for. And by being this good with the bat, it has allowed for something else. The Kiwis could actually bat him at 6. After those initial 20 tests, he basically split his time between batting at 6 and 7. It's probably too simplistic to show this and then say the bloke should have batted at 6 way more, though you can certainly make a very good case for that. But I think this really shows that having a player of this skill allowed for New Zealand to have a more varied lineup. When you're playing against a strong bowling attack and you're a bit worried, you play him at 7. When you're playing on flat pitches at home, you push him up and bring in the extra bowler. His average of 39 with the gloves is worth more because he gave them tactical options. But there are other handy parts of Watling's game, like he averaged more against spin than pace, and that average holds up real well even in Asia. That makes him a weird opening candidate to begin with, but it makes him an ideal test match number 6 and 7, being that he can handle the second new ball, but also is going to be okay when he's starting off against spin. And I want you to think about that comment by Watling. He is right. He's a limited player. He can't score fast, for instance. Chances are he might not have made it if they'd persisted with him up the order. Also, when going up against 2 of the best bowling attacks of his era, India and Australia, he's not been able to find consistent runs or really many runs at all. But he has been pretty good against everyone else. So his limited comment is perfect, but also brutally unfair. Because despite being limited, he has managed to squeeze out every last run, or in his case, every last dot ball from Test cricket. Here's a really interesting one for you. The most common ball in Test cricket is the length ball outside off stump by a seamer. For almost all seam bowlers, this is their stock delivery. In the last 5 years, top order players averaged 20 from this ball. Watling is averaging over 100. That's the corridor ball. That's the ball that every bowler practices in the nets. That's the ball that we see over and over again in Test cricket. And BJ Watling doesn't smash it everywhere. He doesn't score off it really at all. In fact, he scores slower off it than the guys who go out to it more. He just doesn't go out to it. He is 5 times less likely to go out to a ball in the corridor outside off stump than another top 7 player in Test cricket. That's remarkable. Now, he is limited, so of course his weakness is back of a length or shorter. But to dismiss him this way still takes a long time because he is so patient. So his career against quicks is really a test of their fitness against his will. The only time in Test cricket he really tries to score is when you overpitch to him. The rest of the time, he is a stone. A magnificent, sexy stone. And let us just take one last rub of the sexy Watling stone. Remember when I told you he averaged 38 in his Test career and you nodded along thinking, yeah, that seems about right. What if I flipped all that on you and let you know that for Northern Districts, his domestic side, he averaged far less than that. And it's not just average in terms of his high score and number of hundreds, he's just been a far better scorer of runs for New Zealand than he ever was for Northern Districts. And it's not even that close. And it's not that no players have a higher record internationally than domestically, that does happen. But the numbers I showed you before, that is his overall average for both teams. This one I'm showing you now was his average in first class cricket before he made his Test debut. This is a remarkably low record to be entering Test cricket with. And you can see that he didn't just beat it, he completely smashed it in the mouth. Well, not in the mouth, he probably waited for it to bowl a full one and then punched it down the ground. And we have seen this before. An analyst told me once that around 30% of players average more in tests than first class cricket. And that kind of makes sense. As the pitches are better, the players are peaked at their peaks and often disposed at their first sign of being ordinary. But it's rare to average more than 5 over your domestic mark. Domestic cricket isn't a great judge on how good a player will be in Test cricket, but it is a good judge on the basic quality of a player. And if you're old enough, you may remember when Michael Vaughan outscored his domestic record and the entire world of cricket never shut up about it. If you're too young to remember this happening, go and ask your uncle and he'll bang on about it for hours. The really interesting thing here is, Vaughan had an improvement of 22% from his first class career. Watling had a 25% improvement, and no one talked about it. Now I get it, he's a wicket-keeper from New Zealand who blocks the ball a lot. But still, this is a remarkable effort and no one noticed it. Watling was a failed opening batter who became an understudy to one of the few true rock stars of wicket-keeping. He batted slower than almost anyone in his position and built innings by not nicking off to length balls and squeezing out every last drop of what he referred to as limited talent. Look at everything I have shown you. Watling wasn't really supposed to play tests. He shouldn't really have been a wicketkeeper, and there was nothing in his record to suggest he'd be a good middle order player. And he certainly wasn't supposed to end up with the 5th best average of any wicketkeeper of all time. When it comes down to it, BJ Watling has been invisible, limited, stoic, surprising, but overall he's just been remarkable.